The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, funded the Denver Prevention Training Center's Capacity Building Assistance, or CEBA program, for high impact prevention program integration. The CEBA funding has four goals: reduce new HIV infections, increase access to care for persons with HIV, improve health outcomes and reduce mortality for persons with HIV, and reduce HIV related disparities. The funding accomplishes its goals through four separate components: national training, both classroom and e learning, regional technical assistance, continuous quality improvement and sustainability for community based organizations, and marketing and administrative support for the CEBA provider network. Finally, the CEBA programs seek to address health disparities and social determinants of health and provide culturally competent and responsive HIV prevention services. The CEBA project is funded to provide training and technical assistance to health departments and their clinical partners in the western part of the United States. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Zami Tinashe Hyemingway. My pronouns are Zami, he, and him, and I'm the CEBA manager for Denver Prevention Training Center and one of your hosts today.
And I'm your other host, Miss Jai Smith. I use she, her, and he, him pronouns. I am the CEO of Toadhenge Consulting, and I am also an identity consultant with Denver Prevention Training Center.
We are so excited to have you here today for episode 4. For folks who missed episodes 1 through 3, Ms. Jai, why don't you go ahead and update folks?
Yeah, absolutely. Episode 1, we discussed social determinants of health and how those impact our lives as trans and non-binary people. Episode 2, we discussed employment discrimination and financial inequity and how that impacts our health. And in our last episode, we discussed talent acquisition and retention and strategies for recruiting and maintaining our trans and non-binary workforce.
Thank you, Ms. Jai. Today's episode, we're going to be focusing on professional development and health for transgender and non-binary employees.
And Zami, you had mentioned before that you have mentored employees and that mentorship is important, and you've worked a lot one-on-one with employees. Can you give us some strategies for one-on-one professional development and what that can look like?
Absolutely, Ms. Jai. So we know the power of professional development, we know the power of coaching and mentorship, and so when I'm working with trans and non-binary employees, and as a trans and non-binary employee, when folks work with me, it's really important to sit down with a trans and non-binary employee and focus on what their goals are. Many of us, like we talked about in the past, due to social determinants of health, we have very different forms of history around employment. Some folks may be only experiencing entry-level positions, and maybe our goal for our career is really just to work for that health department, work for that community-based organization or that HIV serving organization, and that's it. And so once we get there, we really don't know what our career can look like. And so doing one-on-one professional development and coaching with a trans and non-binary employee is so important, because what it does is it allows us to envision what our career can be beyond that entry-level position. And we really need to do that in a one-on-one setting. So for example, if you are a manager, a director, or even a peer, you can sit with your colleague, your trans and non-binary colleague, and say, what are your goals for this position? How do you envision your career? And how can I support you in getting to where you want to be? Do you have aspirations of being a coordinator, a manager, a director, a CEO? And if you do, what does that look like? What type of areas of strength and weaknesses do you want to focus on to get you to that goal? Right? And then really sit and have goals. So goals from anywhere from 30-day goals to annual goals to a 5-year goal and plan, and then slowly create an action plan with your trans and non-binary colleague or employee to start working towards those goals. I can't really speak more to the power of goal setting and that one-on-one mentorship. I know I've had mentors and coaches in my life, and if it weren't for the mentors and coaches I had, I don't know if I would be here and be able to say that I'm a manager of a regional program.
That really resonates with me, because I also have benefited from mentors in the field of public health, but mentors who are also trans and non-binary. And I think about for myself, when I started working in public health, my goal fresh out of college with my bachelor's degree was to work with LGBTQ youth doing sexual health education. And that was my first job out the gate, and it was an entry-level position. So I didn't have a vision for what am I going to be doing in 5 years, because as far as I could see was just to that entry-level position.
Right. And that's really important, right? Oftentimes we don't see trans and non-binary employees in higher up positions. So we mostly see ourselves in these entry-level positions, and we really don't know where to go from there. And so for folks like you who your goal was just to get into the agency and to work with the particular population, then what we want to do is really start to massage that goal and massage our employees' confidence, right? And say, now that you've met your 5-year goal, what do you want to do now? And so when hiring and retaining trans and non-binary talent, we really want to say, okay, yes, we hired them for this position, but what are their skills? How can we increase their skills and develop their skills? And what other parts of the organization would benefit from having this person, right? And then really work with them to say, hey, do you see yourself in these higher up positions? So that then throughout your organization, you have trans and non-binary employees from the front desk to the frontline staff, to executive leadership, and even board, right? And so we are seen throughout the entire organization, the foundation of the organization, which really just benefits the organization as well as the individual employee and the trans and non-binary community in your local areas as well.
So Zami, a lot of what you're sharing is beyond this one-on-one coaching as well. It's providing opportunities for folks, for trans and non-binary people to become leaders in our organizations. So what are some strategies? How can we support leadership opportunities for trans and non-binary employees?
That's a really important question, Ms. Jai. Like I was saying a little bit ago, when we first come into organizations, usually that's just our goal. And so one of the first things that we need to do when really trying to support trans and non-binary employees and leadership development and organizational development is to say, what's your goals, right? And many of us don't know what our goals are. And so really sitting with that employee and saying, okay, when I first started, some of my goals were to complete this amount of programs, was to learn how to write a grant, was to start this initiative, etc. And so providing examples of what some of these goals can be. After we develop goals, then say, okay, I really want to invest in your leadership development. And so maybe that starts with allowing the trans and non-binary employee to run a program or a project. Maybe it starts with basic facilitation. So if one day they want to lead e-learning and classroom development, then say, okay, I want you to work with the seasoned facilitator so that you could build the muscle around your facilitation skill, right? Say they want to be the program, say a learning and development manager for everyone who does capacity building and technical assistance, that some of this can be, okay, let's look at the skills needed to do this work. And then once you do that, you create programs and projects for the trans and non-binary employee to take the lead on it. And from that, you allow the trans and non-binary person to take the lead on these programs, right, and on these projects. And so once we start allowing and creating opportunities to see the leadership of the trans and non-binary employee, when we start to have programs or initiatives or supplemental funding that allows us to lead different aspects of our organization, before we go to our project managers that we already have, or before we go to staff who've already been in leadership positions, then we can say this is an opportunity for you to do that. And we provide really scaffolding or protection for the trans and non-binary employee so that they feel supported throughout the process. And so understanding that, this might be their first time in a position of leadership, and if it is their first time, they might need a little more support, right? Mm-hmm. And not looking at support as hand-holding, but looking at support as building a solid foundation so that this trans and non-binary employee really can thrive, so that they can see themselves throughout the entire organization, agency. And really, when I'm thinking about this, when we create these opportunities, it really allows for us to build more leaders throughout our entire organization, not just the trans and non-binary person, right? And then another strategy for providing opportunities for trans and non-binary folks to have professional development and leadership is actually go after grant and funding to expand your programming, right? Mm. We always want to diversify our funding. We always want to make sure that our employees are taken care of and we have backup money. And so creating an additional program or initiative or a project specifically for the trans and non-binary employee where they can lean into it feeling more confident, that is a great way for someone to invest in the professional development and leadership, because you're already creating something or going after funding that speaks to their strengths, right? Mm-hmm. I know when I started off as a project manager, it was to lead an initiative for trans and non-binary folks ending the HIV epidemic and taking a status neutral approach around gender affirming care. And that was my first time being a project manager, but it was speaking to my strengths. I had already had experiences leading different initiatives and campaigns, but this was my first time doing a major regional project. And folks trusted in me. Mm-hmm. And because they trusted in me, because it was on an area that I already had experience in, I was able to really move with confidence. And moments where I wasn't sure how to do something, my manager or the leadership team would say, no problem, let us show you how we do this. And then that just continued to build my skills. So really trusting and providing opportunities and saying, you don't have to have a history to do this, because we're going to provide you with the resources to set you up for success, so that next time you go for a leadership position, you have the confidence needed to execute that project.
Mm. A lot of these pieces too, for me and for how I have been supported throughout my career, have looked like allowing me the space to also make a mistake. Mm-hmm. And the response to that mistake was not something that pushed me out of the work or made the workplace feel like I couldn't make mistakes. So could you speak a little bit to how communicating as a supervisor, as an organization, with employees who are being given opportunities to explore something new or try something new, how that communication can be framed so that it is building up the employee as opposed to unintentionally pushing them out of the work?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And just like a great reflection, many of us don't want to make mistakes. Who wants to make a mistake? No. So many of us don't want to make mistakes, and we have this fear. I know for a very long time, I wouldn't go after positions because I was afraid to make a mistake or afraid that maybe I didn't have the skill, right? And so again, I think it comes down to good mentorship, goal setting, and really investing in your employees around, you know, we want everyone to thrive here. Whether you want to stay at this organization or not, we want to invest in you. And so part of investing in you is taking a chance and taking a risk. And so we are willing to take a chance on you so that you can lead this project. You let us know what your fears are and how we can support you in those fears. And that's really important. Just from the very beginning, say, we don't expect you to be perfect. We don't expect you to know everything. Mm-hmm. In fact, we know you don't know everything. And we didn't know everything, but the way that we got to where we are and we built that expertise and we became subject matter experts was through failing at different aspects and having a good coach, mentor, executive leader who said, oh, that's no problem. I made that same mistake as well. This is how we fix it, right? And so again, it really is about creating that foundation, creating the safety, and leaning in with compassion and understanding and saying, we don't want you to be perfect. We want you to thrive, and we want to support you. And so that means being honest about what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And if you don't know what those are, let's figure that out together so that we can really, really massage those areas and elevate you so that your wingspan around your professional development expands.
So even when we are working from this perspective of trying to do as much as possible to support our folks, we're trying to massage and allow them to grow their wingspan, sometimes there are still missteps that happen that require a response, that require us to address with our colleague, with our employee, with our employee's employee, some sort of misstep. So, but oftentimes that takes the place of corrective action, or that becomes this punitive response. Can you talk a little bit about alternative ways that folks can respond that, again, will not push folks out of the work?
I love this question, because I feel that so many of us are afraid of corrective action and being written up and punitive responses, right? Mm-hmm. And what people really need to understand, including executive leaders and managers, is that corrective action is supposed to help us stay in the organization, not push us out of the organization, right? And so if I were to say to a manager, executive leader, a supervisor, is that if you have a employee, whether they're trans or non-binary, cisgender, like whatever, that when someone is messing up, that is an opportunity for learning and development, not an opportunity to get rid of them, right? First thing is, to hire and fire and rehire is really expensive for organizations, right? To have to invest in so much training in someone and then to after 3 months, okay, they're not a good fit, so we're gonna replace them with someone else. You have to go through the hiring process all over again, training all over again. That's really expensive, and we don't have time for that, just being honest, right? And so why not pause and really invest in your employee? And for the trans and non-binary employee, we really need to understand that this might be the first time, again, working in an office setting because of the social determinants of health and because of employment discrimination, right? And so if this is the first time, then things that might seem quote unquote common sense to those of us who might have a history of working in clinics, health departments, different offices, community-based organizations, things that might be considered common sense isn't common for the trans and non-binary employee. So there might need some additional support and professional development around those areas. So instead of looking at this employee as, why do they keep making this mistake? Why aren't they being professional? Why can't they get along? Why are they having arguments with other people? Why don't we pause and say, what's really happening? Oh, it might just be a shift in culture, right? It might be that this isn't the environment that they're used to, and we want our office, we want our organization, our business, our clinic, our health department to be a place where everyone can thrive as employees, and where everyone, whether they have a history of working in this type of environment or not, they feel comfortable and safe to be their authentic self. And so before we go to corrective action, we should go to a conversation, right? We should sit down with the trans and non-binary employee and say, hey, how do you feel like you're adjusting to this environment? What support do you need? Are there areas where you feel like you're struggling, or ways that we could be more supportive for you? You know, and if you're noticing things, just be honest and say, hey, I'm noticing that you may be struggling with emails. You know, and I bring emails up because I used to supervise almost an entire trans and non-binary staff, and one of my employees was a young person who had worked in different offices but never made it beyond a year there. You know, and I hired her, and I used to say, what support do you need? What support do you need? And often she would say, nothing. But I noticed she never replied to my emails. And I would be like, I'm sure I sent you an email, and didn't hear anything for days. And so I went to her and would say, hey, did you get my email? Oh yeah, I got it, I read it. I was like, okay. And then, you know, it's like, okay, so she received it. You know, and then I said, well, if you can reply to the email within 24 to 48 hours, just letting me know that you received it, so that I'm not wondering if you did. And that would happen a few times. And in our one-on-one, I said, okay, can we talk about emails a little bit? You know, I didn't write her up. I didn't do any corrective action. I just had a conversation. And she just said, oh, I didn't realize that I needed to reply to you within 24 to 48 hours until you said something to me. I just figured I need to read the email and do what you said in the email. And I said, okay, so let's talk about some etiquette. You know, and what I discovered is that she was actually afraid to talk to me about some of these things because in the past she was actually punished for it. And so what I said to her was, I want to invest in you. I want you to feel like you can thrive in this environment, and I'm not writing you up or punishing you. I just want to know how I could be a stronger, more supportive supervisor for you. And from that moment on, I was able to sit with her and talk to her about writing emails, sit with her and talk to her about Microsoft Excel and different etiquette things that no one has sat with her and talked to her about. And she ended up being at that agency for 3 or 4 years after that. You know, and that was amazing. That was the longest employment history that she had in a professional setting. And so instead of us going to corrective action and assuming that someone knows something that maybe they don't, what we really need to do is begin with a conversation. And then if it gets to a point where we're doing corrective action, we need to remember that corrective action is how do we support the employee to get on par with the job, not create all these trainings and barriers and requirements for someone to do in 30 days that we know they're not going to be able to accomplish, right? And oftentimes that's how corrective action is set up. We're going to give you 10 things to do in 30 days so that you fail, so that we have a reason to fire you. But what we want to do is sit with the employee and say, what do you feel like you need support in so that you could do your job and do it well, and how can I support you? And sit with that employee and write that corrective action out together, so that they're saying, this is what I need to be a better employee and to feel stronger in my work. And this is what I need from you as my supervisor to do this work as well. And then you all work it together. Mm-hmm. And that's really what corrective action is about. That's really what it's about as a supervisor, to say, I'm investing in you and your development, and I want you to thrive.
We've mentioned a lot so far around what professional development does to support the employee, but we haven't talked much, and I heard a little bit, but we haven't talked much about how professional development of trans and non-binary people supports the organization. And you had mentioned less turnover, right? It's expensive to hire, it's expensive to fire, it's expensive to market positions that are opening up every 3 months. And we see those and we're like, why is this position open again, right? So what are some organizational benefits to professional development for trans and non-binary staff?
Yeah, great question. So many of the clinics and health departments and community-based organizations that PTC works with around technical assistance and capacity building, one of their main things are, we don't know how to get trans and non-binary clients into our office, and when we do, we don't know how to keep them there. And when I think about the benefit of the organization, like you said a few episodes ago, trans and non-binary people speak, right? We talk to each other.
100%, yes.
Like now, but also just in general, right?
Yeah.
We talk to each other. And so we tell folks, like, these are the organizations that are supportive. These are organizations that are culturally responsive and practice cultural humility. And a big piece of that is also saying, if you go to this organization, speak to Miss Jai. Miss Jai is non-binary. One of the girls are there, one of the boys are there, and then we know to go, right? And so having a trans and non-binary employee starts making your organization, your clinic, your health department more safe, or at least safer for a trans and non-binary person, because we know one of us is there, mm-hmm. right? And so it already starts to open this road for us, already opens the door, because we can see ourselves there, right? So that's one of the ads. You're more likely to serve trans and non-binary clients and community members if you have a trans and non-binary employee. The other thing is, again, trans and non-binary folks, we aren't just front desk staff. We are clinicians, we are physicians, we are managers and supervisors. And so it's really important to have trans and non-binary folks throughout your agency, not just in entry-level positions, but throughout your agency, because it creates this cultural ad, and it increases cultural humility and having a culturally responsive program, honestly. And so the organization benefits because you have the expertise of the trans and non-binary employee, not only through the field in which they came in from, but through lived experience. Mm-hmm. And although many health departments, community-based organizations, clinics, they focus more on degree and employment, lived experience is just as valuable, right? We know the power of walking in and sitting with a client who has a similar identity as you and has a similar story as you, and even being that client, having a physician who looks like you, having a physician who has a similar lived experience, the way that we are more likely to be vulnerable, the way that we are more likely to talk about our risk behavior, the way that we are more likely to ask questions. I think about the discrepancy between how many folks who are trans folks of color who are on PrEP versus how many white trans folks are on PrEP. And a lot of that is because the person talking to us about PrEP is not trans, is not a person of color. Mm-hmm. And so if we don't see ourselves, it's hard for us to want to lean into some of this information. And so having trans and non-binary folks throughout your agency really creates a more culturally competent, culturally humble, culturally responsive organization and agency for you. And you're more likely to increase your clients who are transgender and non-binary. You're more likely to increase retention of transgender and non-binary clients and employees. And it's just additional cultural add.
Mm-hmm. I think also about institutional knowledge. And so if we always go to the same program manager who knows how to write grants, if we always go to the same folks that we know can already have this skill set, as opposed to investing in our trans and non-binary staff and helping them build those skills, then what happens when that person leaves our organization? Now we've lost this institutional knowledge. So this is also a way that we can start to shift the ways that we develop our staff in general. Mm-hmm. So we're giving opportunities to folks to become professionals in the field, and so that our organization can not fall to pieces when someone leaves and they carry with them all of the understanding of how to write a grant, how to run a program, how to develop a program, which organizations they should reach out to that are connected to our communities. So it also increases that institutional knowledge and prevents that from being lost.
Absolutely, and it also prevents tokenism.
Yeah.
Right? So if you only have one trans or non-binary employee working at your agency and organization, then when they leave, who do you have left, right? And also when we look at folks, we want to diversify the trans and non-binary folks who are hiring, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're only hiring, for example, white trans and non-binary folks, then you're also missing a cultural piece around how to serve indigenous trans folks, how to serve black trans folks, how to serve Asian and Pacific Islander trans folks, right? And so we want to diversify, and that prevents us from engaging in tokenism, whether it's intentional or unintentional. It prevents us from doing that, and it creates this knowledge, because we know trans folks aren't a monolith. And so if you're really trying to serve the trans and non-binary community, you want to have more than one trans and non-binary staff. You want to have more than one trans and non-binary staff that's not in the same race and ethnic group. Also want to think about class, think about education, think about ability, right? So if we aren't serving many trans and non-binary folks who are disabled, why is that? You know, maybe we need to look at, are we engaging in ableism unintentionally? So also thinking about things like that, wanting to avoid tokenism. And when it comes to institutional knowledge, also understanding that there's institutional knowledge in groups, right? So if you have only one person working with MSM of color, when that person leaves, then, you know, there goes all your connections to community, all your connections to partnered organizations and collaborators. So you want to make sure that everyone's doing their part. And it also protects the employee from burnout. You know, everything that has to do with trans and non-binary, you go to this one person, that is going to lead to burnout. Mm-hmm. It's going to lead to exhaustion. I'm exhausted just talking about it, right? And so one of the things we want to think about is we want to protect our trans and non-binary employees and all of our employees who hold identities that get marginalized, right? And part of that is making sure that we don't just have one, but we have multiple folks there. And that protects institutionalized knowledge, that protects the collaborations and partnerships that you have in the community and with your partnering organizations. And it just really protects the community and all. And it shows the community that you truly are the community that you serve. Mm. So Ms. Shai, I've been doing a lot of talking. So it's time for me to ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to share with the audience how you feel that professional development helps reduce barriers to healthy living for trans and non-binary employees.
Yeah, so this kind of gets a little bit back to what we talked about in the first episode, which is the social determinants of health. So if we know that finances at its root are going to provide opportunities for us to address some of the social determinants of health barriers that we experience as trans and non-binary people, then we can start to unwind those things. So the first thing I think of is housing. If I am working somewhere that is paying me full-time for my work, it's paying me equitably, then there's a greater likelihood that I'm going to be able to afford a place to live that helps protect me from the elements, that allows me space to grow, to rest, and address some of those pieces that can happen when we don't have those spaces. So when I'm working in an organization that is investing in me as a professional and is helping me to grow from direct line staff to program manager to associate director to director, oftentimes those advancements involve a pay increase. And if it's involving a pay increase, then there is a greater likelihood that I'm going to be able to shift from renting to being able to afford a mortgage. And generally, honestly, mortgages are cheaper than renting. But one of the barriers in that with housing is that we might need to be working in an organization long term in order to qualify for a home loan. So if I'm going to be working in an organization and I'm going from those positions and advancing and moving up, I'm likely staying in the organization for longer as well, which might allow me the opportunity to get a mortgage. So it can help to build wealth in these ways, but also to provide support in housing. And then in some of the other barriers we've talked about, so the ability to afford nutritious food. If I'm making more money, I'm going to be able to shift how much I can budget towards a grocery budget. If I'm making more money, I'm going to be able to potentially cover more of my healthcare costs. I'm going to be able to start seeing that therapist, as I mentioned in a previous episode. Sometimes therapy is seen as a luxury expense, even though we know it's a necessity. So if I'm able to make money in these ways, I'm able to grow in these ways with the organization, then I'm going to be able to have access to these places. So it'll improve our healthcare access. It will improve our finances overall. It will improve our housing. If I'm working in an organization that allows the opportunity for educational advancement or allows the opportunity to offset the cost of higher education, then if I'm working in that organization for longer, I might see the value in going and getting a higher education degree. And so, or I might see like, oh, if I want to advance in these ways, if I want to become an associate director, maybe it's time for me to go and get my bachelor's degree. Maybe it's time for me to go and get my master's degree. And so it provides opportunities for us to see ourselves in these spaces as well. So in total, we see that professional development, this investment in trans and non-binary staff members, is going to lead to unwinding a lot of these barriers to health that we've been talking about throughout this series. And because it's unwinding those barriers, it's going to lead to better health outcomes.
Absolutely. And, not only is it going to lead to better outcomes for the individual, but really we see a communal impact, right? So if we have more folks who are able to, pay for their medication, then we see more folks who are able to stay on PrEP. We see more folks engage in their HIV medication, their antiretroviral treatment. And so we see that there's less communicable diseases and infectious diseases out in the community, right? And even when we think about healthful living, you mentioned food scarcity. So you mentioned that if we're able to pay for our food, then that means things like diabetes and other food-related illnesses, we see less complications with those. So it seems like in general, everyone just benefits. And go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say, the other thing that this makes me think of is that for a lot of us in the trans and non-binary community, because of employment opportunities being scarce, because of professional development and advancement being scarce, a lot of us are pushed into the underground economy. And so we're pushed into things like substance sales, sex work. We're pushed into spaces where we can make sure our base needs are met because of the challenges that we see in employment, because of the challenges with professional development. And so if we're investing in our trans and non-binary staff, and helping them to grow in the field, helping them to grow in their positions, helping them to obtain more financial security, then we are less likely to push folks into the underground economy, push our staff into the underground economy. We're less likely to push folks into the underground economy to supplement an income because what they're making in their direct line position is not enough to actually cover the cost of their basic needs. And as a result, folks are going to have less engagement with the criminal justice system as well. So we're also helping to protect our trans and non-binary staff members and our trans and non-binary community from police interactions and from engagement in the underground economy.
Absolutely. So Ms. Jai, we've been talking a lot about the barriers, and I would love for us to discuss more about how does attacking these barriers and addressing these barriers help the health outcome for our community?
And this is really, I love this question because this is really what we are trying to do, which is ultimately improve the health of our community as trans and non-binary people and address the health disparities that we experience. So you already mentioned a bit about HIV treatment and HIV prevention. So if we are addressing these barriers, we are more likely to engage in HIV prevention, therefore preventing HIV in our communities. We're more likely to engage in HIV treatment for those of us who are living with HIV. So we're less likely to have new transmissions. We're less likely to have complications as a result of HIV that is unmanaged in a person's body. So some of the chronic health conditions that can come from that are less likely to happen in our communities. But we also see that if we have financial security, if we have professional development because of the financial security associated with that, we're less likely to experience things like diabetes. We're less likely to associate it with nutritious food. We're less likely to experience anxiety, depression, not because they aren't present for us, but because we're now able to receive therapeutic treatment. We're able to afford the cost of medication. We're able to start unwinding some of these anxieties and depression and psychological distress associated with money, because so much psychological distress is associated with money. We can't afford a place to live. We can't afford food. We can't afford our bills. We can't afford a phone. We can't afford to take time off work. We can't afford to take care of our children. And so being able to address those pieces at its core is going to reduce that load, that stress that we experience. The other piece of this too for our health outcomes is that we're going to see that folks, chronic health, they're the pieces that we might be delaying getting care around. If we have access to health care, if we have consistent access to health care, and we have the money to afford our visits and our medications, the health needs that we have been going unaddressed, we're going to start to be able to address. Because it might be, we mentioned in a previous episode, having to steel ourselves before going out into the world. So if I'm working in a position and I've been working there 6 months, I may not be prepared to steel myself to go into the physician's office to check out whatever health thing has been going on for me. But if I'm working in my job and I've been working there for 2 years, I might now be prepared to start addressing some of those things. So again, professional development can help us to make sure that we're addressing our chronic health needs. And ultimately, it's going to reduce mortality in our community.
Absolutely. And, I really love that you brought up psychological distress, because we mentioned that about 62% of trans and non-binary folks are living with a depression, right? Mm-hmm. They're living with either undiagnosed or a diagnosed depressive mood disorder. And often it goes unchecked, which is why we see over 20% of trans and non-binary folks, with suicidal ideation, right? And a lot of folks don't make the connection between economic stability and psychological distress. But like you just laid out, if someone is struggling with, where am I going to sleep at night? Am I going to be attacked if I go to a shelter? How am I going to afford food? How am I going to afford food and my medication? How am I going to afford rent and my medication? That creates the stress, and then not to mention the minority stress that folks experience, right? Mm-hmm. So the stress of day-to-day transphobia, day-to-day gender-based violence, and how this discrimination and the social determinants of health really take a toll on us mentally, and how that shows up in the work environment. Mm-hmm. Which is why professional development, mentorship, coaching is so important, because we're letting folks know that we understand that things have not been easy for you, and we want work to be a little easier. We want you to come to work and feel like you don't have to put on a shield. We want you to come to work and know that we believe in you, we invest in you, you are worthy and deserving of being here, right? And that allows for us to begin to heal a lot of that psychological distress and be able to show up as our authentic selves, right? And creates the sustainability for us. So I just love how you map that out, and really just shows the importance that not only do you need to invest in us, in our economic development, because it helps us pay our bills, but having economic development really does allow us to focus on our health needs and show up as the best person when we go to work, when we show up in the community, when we're with our family and our friends.
Absolutely. One additional thing that this has me thinking about is that for a lot of us, we might be living paycheck to paycheck. We might be one medical emergency away from experiencing financial distress. And so investing in the professional development of our trans and non-binary staff helps to increase resiliency around that. We talk a lot about increasing resiliency in trans and non-binary communities. This is a way to do it. And so it helps to increase resiliency against that, because it provides the opportunity for folks to save money. But the other piece is that if we have folks who are consistently getting their health care, they're consistently getting their medication because they are on health insurance that is stable, they're able to get their hormone replacement therapies, they're not having breakages in their coverage, then we're also going to reduce the overall distress that folks can experience related to gender dysphoria because they can't get their medication. Or if folks are going on and off their hormone replacement therapies, they're going to experience menopause-like symptoms. They're going to experience changes with the body. They're going to experience all sorts of things that can lead to not only mental health challenges, but also just physical health challenges. Like heart disease, like all of these things that can occur. So if we're able to allow folks the opportunity to be consistent through professional development, keeping them in positions or providing spaces for positions, keeping them in the organization, retaining them in the organization, then we are going to reduce all the negative health outcomes that can occur from going on and off medications as well. So this has been a great conversation so far. Maybe we can give some examples of organizations that can serve as models for how to invest in the professional development of trans and non-binary employees.
Absolutely. Gender Health SF in San Francisco, who hires transgender and non-binary community members for several positions within their clinic. For positions that require an advanced degree, for example, clinicians, they do require proof of degree and licensure. However, for patient navigator positions, they do not require advanced degrees, but require lived experience and an understanding of navigating the public healthcare system so that they can navigate that process for their clients.
Another example is TransCan Work, based in Aurora Hills, California. TransCan Work is a job skills development program for trans and non-binary people.
Next is the Transgender Employment Program in San Francisco. What they do is they have transgender and non-binary professionals run programs and provide peer mentorship for other transgender and non-binary professionals beginning their career.
Another model is Reverend Valerie Spencer's Holistic Empowerment Institute. The Holistic Empowerment Institute offers development opportunities for transgender and non-binary professionals engaged in mental health and supports those who provide spiritual coaching.
Next, we have transgender women involved in strategies for transformation, also known as TWIST, which is a social skills building and education intervention for trans women living with HIV.
And then we have 2 fellowship programs through the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. Activate is a fellowship program aimed at professional development of trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming Black, Latina, and trans people of color. Elevate is a fellowship program designed to advance the leadership skills of Black and Latina transgender women.
We've been having some really amazing conversations the last 4 episodes around the social determinants of health for transgender non-binary folks, especially in investing in our economic development and our financial stability. It's really important that as we're doing programming for transgender non-binary employees and people, our community in general, that instead of us focusing on risk behavior, we're focusing on the social determinants of health in general. For example, for economic stability and financial stability, we need to be focusing on professional development. How do we recruit and retain our transgender non-binary talent? How do we do mentoring and goal setting? How do we help our community invest in their health and wellness through making sure that they're not deciding between whether or not they're paying rent or paying for their life-saving medication? When we think about ending the HIV epidemic, what we're thinking about is every single door is the right door. And that also means that every single door that we walk into for employment, it should be the right door for us. Transgender and non-binary folks are active members of our community, they're important members of our community, and they are talented members of our community. We are your clients, we are your doctors, we are your clinicians, we are your reverends, we are your police officers, we are everywhere. And so making sure that when we come into your building, that we're not just a token, right? But we are valuable members of your organization, we're valuable members of your community, and we are investing in the life, the wellness, and the health of transgender non-binary folks by making sure that we are compensating them well, that we are having equitable hiring practices, and that we are doing talent acquisition intentionally so that we have a diverse staff of talented, amazing transgender non-binary folks.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, for joining us for this series. We have discussed a lot of different pieces, and I'm so grateful that we have the opportunity to come to you in this format and to sit and talk about our experiences and talk about our expertise and what we know in the field that we have been working in for so long. So thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, share this with a colleague, share this series with a colleague. They deserve to learn this information. And join us for season 2, where we're going to be talking about the neighborhood and built environment. We're going to go in depth talking about housing as a social determinant of health. We're going to talk about the neighborhoods that we live, work, and play in. And we're going to be talking about the legislative environment, the policies that exist in our built environment, and how those impact our health and well-being.
Thank you all again for watching this series. Remember, the Denver Prevention Training Center offers technical assistance and capacity building in the western region of the United States. Visit us at www.denverptc.org, and we'll be more than happy to connect with you.